Hey guys, nice here once again. If you remember our rant on life tap support from the last video, it should be no surprise that I'm now going to use the 3-to-1 recipe to get rid of it. Yep. Anyway, we're into Act 4 now, and things start looking up a bit as we get our first natural Quicksilver Flask drop in the Dried Lake, which we'll start using once we don't need a Bismuth Flask to fix our resists. We then kill Vol and get Carrion Golem as our reward. This is pretty much how the build is gonna look until we finish the campaign, unless we find some supports that make us shift course. It's a fairly standard minion army setup, with Carrion Golem acting as a general, by buffing the rest of the minions while getting stronger itself. Jewels are plentiful with these Mirage Wishes, we even get a rare, but it's another Viridian Jewel, so nothing useful yet. Now as we level up here in the Crystal Veins, we're at the stage where we start picking up a lot of resistance on the tree, the Ruthless special. Back in town, while selling some gear, we come across these. That is an absurd pair of boots for this stage, 20% movement speed, chaos resistance, and even some rarity. There's a good chance we're still wearing these in maps. After killing Calm, we identified this shield which, while not a minion shield, is strong enough defensively to justify the swap. At a certain point, the raw defenses just outweigh the minion stats. With this, we're able to cap our resistance, especially once you factor in the extra 20% from our ascendancy. So we can finally swap from the Bismuth to a Quicksilver Flask. We drop the Onslaught helmet here, not something we'll use, but it could be interesting later as an animate guardian option if we find a good weapon to pair with it. Shortly after, we get a superior Quicksilver Flask drop, which feels like a bit of a blessing. But what's actually a blessing is this arena. An Orb of Alchemy, followed by a Regal Orb. And then inside the Mirage, we hit a Currency Gene's cache that drops a Chaos Orb. After that, we take down the Resto, and promptly miss on the Quicksilver Transmute. As we level up in the Belly of the Beast, we pick up the 5 mana per second mastery. With Mind Over Matter, our mana is part of our effective health pool, and right now, it's the bottleneck as both our life and regen are much higher by comparison. Ideally, you want your mana to keep up, roughly around a 3:2 life to mana ratio, with 40% of damage taken from mana, so this helps to bring it more in line. After Piety, we make a couple small upgrades. An Amulet with some extra life, and mana regen, and a Ruby Flask to finish capping fire resistance. Then, as we take down the Widri, Chevron, and Maligaro, we move on to Malachi, and I'll let the fight play out as is tradition. We'll also be covering Act 5 in this video, as we're getting to the point where upgrades and major milestones start to slow down a bit, so it makes sense to group things together. Quick side note, the guitar riff on the transition here is pretty awesome.
Now, let us see if you truly understand what it means to be Nightmare. Nightmare is the true Eternal. Selfish. Accept the gift of immortality. Nightmare is the true Eternal. Why are you so in love with death?
Before moving on to Act 5, we make a couple item swaps to trade some of our capped lightning resistance for more life. In the slave pen, we get a drop of the 3 dragon. It's not something we'll be using right now, as our current helmet with life is just better at this stage, but it could be useful later to help fix resistances after Kitava. We also pick up a Jade Flask here. The flat evasion it gives is really nice early on. In the Templar Courts, we finally get our first usable support. For real this time. Immolate requires the enemies to be ignited, and since our Raging Spirits ignite on crits, they effectively enable Immolate for the rest of the minions once the enemy is burning, as any minion linked to Immolate will also be dealing fire damage and refreshing ignites on crit. This also opens up a 4-link setup I've been holding on to, so we'll get that sorted once we get back to town. Back in town, we take a Granite Flask as a reward since we already have a Jade Flask, and after transmuting both, the Granite hits 42% increased armor, which puts it at over 2k armor just by itself, a really nice defensive boost. We also craft a slightly better Minion wand, and then move on to setting up our links. Using a 4-link chest I had stashed, we roll it with alterations until we hit a defensive mod with no life, to take advantage of the 15% increased life mastery. Then quality it up and equip it. This lets us run a triple 2-link setup with Raging Spirits, Skeletons and Carrion Golem all linked to Immolate, our main damage setup going forward. I'll show the final phase of the Innocence fight here, to showcase how strong our damage is now with the new setup. Before turning in our second Uncarved Gemstone, I go gambling again, since now that we are above level 50, we can hit the second tier of Minion ones. But we miss on every single one. Anyway, we head to Siosa and pick up Animate Guardian. We don't have a proper setup for it yet, but it's important to start leveling it early. Here in the ossuary, we get rewarded for picking up Despair earlier, as we drop Punishment, which is a very flexible curse since it works regardless of damage type. In the Reliquary, we find an Artisan Strongbox, so I go back to town to grab a couple transmutes and outs to roll it. But after a couple outs, I immediately regret this decision and stop. But hey, we can elude ourselves that it was the +1 chest level that made it drop a GCP. As we head into the Kitava fight, I'll let it play out as usual. But the nice thing about Kitava is that, because he's such a chunky boy, it's pretty easy to tell when he's ignited, so it's a good way to gauge how often Immolate is active. And we're at about 8 hours for Act 5, not exactly speed running, but we're alive. And with the resistance penalty applied, we swap to the 3 Dragons helmet, as foretold, to get our resistances back in order. Let me know how the spacing feels. Grouping next like this seems to work better as the run slows down, but I'm curious what you think. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time, if there is a next time.